Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Lesiba, let me start with you. We know, for example, that Anglo-Plat was adamant that it's not going to consider wage demands, saying that the agreement only ends, next year, June. Take us through why the NUM has decided to initiate discussions with the Chamber to bring forward that negotiations.
Well, our feeling, Karima, was that we needed to meet with the Chamber of Mines in order to try and bring these negotiations forward, precisely because it looks like the biggest problem we have now is the issue of wages. And everyone is saying wages, and therefore we felt it's not necessary for us to be entertaining this thing from company to company. We rather have the bargaining forum come together and say, well, in terms of the existing agreement, we are supposed to be negotiating as from June next year. But how about us being proactive and saying, instead of leaving the situation to be out of control, rather be proactive and resolve these matters amicably as soon as possible, and therefore these negotiations will then replace what was to be happening next June.
Now, I know that meetings took place last Friday, and of course some people thought that those discussions that had been initiated was a signal to end the strike, and of course we saw that that was not the case. So are you confident that this measure is in fact going to act as that break? Because it doesn't seem as if your members are in fact heeding that call.
Well, of course, the intention has never been, when we met the chamber, to stop the strike, but to brief them fully in terms of our various positions, which include the fact that we want a commission of inquiry to be established that would look into the conditions and living conditions of mine workers in general. And as part of that, to also say that we propose as the NUM that we bring forward the negotiations, of which the chamber wasn't really totally opposed to it, but said they would like to look at the cost implications of that. We have given them sufficient time to go and do that. But also to say, let's look at the situation more broadly and see what needs to be done in the collieries and gold sector.
Lesiba, let me bring in Vusi from the chamber here. He was saying that the discussions with the chamber, you weren't necessarily opposed. What is the feeling in the chamber about bringing forward negotiations? Are you ready for that? Do you accept the reasons that the National Union of Mineworkers have put on the table as a reason for initiating these talks now instead of next year?
Indeed, in our response, we said we are willing to consider bringing forward the discussions on wage negotiations to make sure that when it's time to implement new wage agreements, we do not delay, because we would have started much earlier. However, we did say, the Gold Caucus of the Chamber of Mines did say that obviously it would have to reflect and look at all consequences that would actually emanate from bringing the wage negotiations forward and what the implications are for doing that. And the leadership of the NUM was actually informed that the Gold Coast would really like to sit down and look at it more carefully before committing to that. However, there is very strong willingness to say, let's bring forward the negotiations and see what we can do about that.
Now let's talk about the gold producers. You're talking about a separate caucus in the chamber wanting to break down what such a move would mean, and presumably people would want to start crunching the numbers. What would be the important factors that would go into a decision to bring this forward? What is it that gold producers would have to take into consideration, Vusi?
I think what's important to start with is that we need to make sure that we respect the wage agreements that we have for the tenure of that. Because if we all of a sudden just move away, I mean, that is what the leadership was saying, it means the wage agreements we have are not worth the paper that they are written on, and it means that we are creating another expectation that maybe in future we might not be able to meet. And it's all these things that need to be considered very carefully. And if we have to actually open negotiations right now, and what would be the most appropriate date to implement the new agreement, if you like. And in its own right, this agreement is going to be a tussling between management and leadership of labor until there's come some kind of an agreement that, okay, fine, this is the right level of payment. So to that extent, and given clearly that the gold companies are actually also not operating, some of them are operating at losses, and looking at all those conditions and the implications that go with it, just to make sure. Remember that our central wage agreement, central wage negotiations at the chamber also takes into consideration the conditions of the various mines. It's not necessarily a sort of across the board, although there would be a minimum to say everybody is this, but then looking at that particular shaft, there are these challenges, looking at that particular company, there are these challenges, and therefore with them, this is the kind of agreement that we go through. So it's just not a simple thing that we say, okay, fine, let's do the changes.
I get the fact that it's not simple and everybody wants to stick to the formula and use the appropriate forums. But of course, that was before Marikana. We know that the Marikana situation was settled, in fact, outside of the bargaining setup that you have in other sectors such as gold and coal. And of course, this raised expectations and has had a knock-on effect, particularly in other sectors. Is the chamber alive to that knock-on effect, and how does it plan to deal with it?
Look, first, the Marikana situation is not an unsustainable situation. It is an unsustainable situation. What actually eventually happened there was that company had it actually wanted to stick to continue to negotiate within the bargaining rules or within the agreements. Obviously, the interest of the company, number one, was at risk, but also the interest of those particular workers in that company was also at risk, and therefore, for the sake of peace and for the sake of stability, Lonmin did what they did. If you listen to Simon Scott today, he insists that yes, we got a wake-up call. However, we need to bring back our workers into the formal structure. And we need to review what has happened and make sure that something like this does not happen again. The chamber is very, very conscious of that. Okay? And in fact, we are very grateful that NUM decided to call the chamber, because that meeting was called by them, to say, look, before we have another Marikana, can we sit down and talk about that? And the leadership of the chamber actually took that into serious consideration. But it's not going to happen just at the click of a finger that, yes, let's go for it. There is going to have to be some serious homework done before a response can be given to the NUM.
What are the time frames?
On last week Friday, there were no time frames given, but there's a realization of the urgency that this thing needs to be addressed as quickly as possible.
Lesiba, let me bring you in here. Your idea was to be proactive, but we've seen strikes flaring up in gold. Your workers, at Mooiplatz in the coal sectors on a legal strike at the moment. Do you think by the time the chamber takes its time to crunch the numbers that we might actually have, that your opportunity might actually be lost, that this proactive approach might actually be lost?
No, Karima, let me first correct one thing. The strike at Mooiplatz is legal, it's protected. It's not part of the Chamber of Mines, because there are those companies that negotiate within the Chamber of Mines, and there are those that are outside. And so Mooiplatz, we are negotiating at shop floor level. There's been disagreement, the matter has been taken to the CMA, we got a certificate to strike. That strike we have got no problem with, because these are the normal strikes when we don't agree. However, we hope that the Chamber of Mines is not going to take too long, because clearly the crisis is spreading. We have seen today AngloGold about more 30,000 or so have joined the strike. We're seeing Beatrix yesterday, so it's all over the show. We really need something that we will be able to use and go to our members and say, guys, we hear what you are saying. Based on what you have said, we have met with the chamber, and now we are we want to go on a mandating process. Today we met with our members already in office and around there to say, what are the demands you'd like to see us presenting in front of the Chamber of Mines? And so that's where we are basically.
Well, gentlemen, we will certainly get you back in here. This is a discussion that we will be having going forward as those, strikes will have to be resolved. Thank you so much, Lesiba from the National Union of Mineworkers and Vusi Mabena from the Chamber of Mines. Thank you, gentlemen.